Hello. All right. So hello, everybody.
Hello. Professor, your screen's frozen and I cannot hear what you're saying in case you're still going.
All right. So sorry for that. We cannot see. Let me start. All right. So today I'm going to talk about. We're going to discuss ethnography, which is top of the observational research. So qualitative research, and so we covered last week on Monday or the interviewing methods. That is to say, in-depth interviews and focus groups. Now we're going to like a different type of qualitative research, which is observational research. And the most like prominent method in observational research is called ethnography or ethnographic research. Um, today, just going to define ethnographic research, provide some example, talk a little bit about the data collection for ethnographic research, advantages and disadvantages, and few example like showing you different example of ethnographic studies. So to start with the definition, first of all, how many of you have heard the term before, ethnography?
I have, Professor.
Oh, so this, okay. So there's a problem with the, okay. So let me try again. So can you hear me now? No one can hear? Okay.
Can hear you, Professor.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. All right. Wish yeah, I heard that earlier. Okay. I missed anything. I was just into talking about what we're going to talk about, like definition of ethnographic research, some example, how to collect data, advantages and disadvantages of ethnographic method, and then just a sample of ethnographic studies and showing you some research studies on ethnographic research. So to start, how many of you, heard the term ethnography or ethnographic before?
I have, Professor.
Section. Do you know what ethno means? Like the prefix. When you hear something as ethno or ethnic, what does that mean?
It relates to like race, like ethnic.
Any guesses?
Well, someone just mentioned races and large groups of people.
Is he frozen for anybody else again?
Yo,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so hello. Can people hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. You'll like be clear for a couple seconds when you come in, and then like it'll just freeze for like no reason after.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I noticed that. So I restarted my Wi-Fi device, so it should work okay. And I'm literally 3 feet away from the device. So I'm not sure why this is happening again. I apologize for that. So I'm not sure how much you can hear me speaking myself. So I was asking a question. Do you know when you hear the term ethnicity or ethnic, or when you hear ethno something, what comes to mind? What do you think the word ethnic or ethno means?
I responded earlier by saying it was kind of related to like race and culture. Is what ethno means.
Right. Yeah. And what? Yeah. So it's like a race or culture. And what is a race? When you say like we have like a race of people, what does that mean? Any guesses?
you have a group of the same, like people of the same origin.
Yeah, yeah. So ethno and anything about ethno is like a group of people. That's what the literal definition is. So when you hear ethnography, that is to say the study of groups of people. So and geography is the study of land, and so that's what ethnography. And so ethnographic research then is trying to observe, or like the method by which you observe a group of people to understand it, right? So in other words, we've heard before, so we went through two other methods, right? So there's content analysis. You look at groups of content, audio, text, visual, video, you name it. And then interviewing, in which individuals talk about themselves, right? Ethnography is like you observe the group of people you want to study directly, and you then try to reconstruct or narrate or give a narrative to the lived reality or the lived experience of individuals within their natural setting or natural environment, right? So in other words, if someone is studying, I've mentioned this example multiple times, the adaptation to remote learning by undergraduate student, So I can look at your comments or reviews, that's one. I could interview about it, or I can sit as a researcher with one of you for like a full semester and just observe what you do while you're taking classes or like working on assignments or doing online quizzes and those sort of things, right? So it's a more naturalistic approach to research. And so what's the point? And so it's a method that wants to portray or like give or describe a culturally unique or culturally cohesive group. So it came from, if you want to get, so the origin of ethnographic research came from anthropology. So you know, like if you heard about like anthropologists, like you would go somewhere, like in some distant island in the middle of the Pacific, and you're studying, I don't know, the Micronesian, some Micronesian tribes. So you would go there and just try to observe like the habits and custom of that group of people. And the benefit from that is you're not getting a secondhand account of what they do, or even or not, they won't tell you what they do. You will see what they do, right? So it reflects, it would be more naturalistic. It would reflect the real experiences or real practices of a group of people. Put a flag on that, because that will become important and you could debate if it's actually naturalistic or not. It's also, the point is like you want to have the group view from within. That is to say, if you're a researcher and then you immerse yourself in the same experience that the people you're studying are going through, right? Through either remote learning or like going into, if you're studying, I don't know, a group of line cooks. So you just go there and see how they work and how they live. You want to study college athletes, you want to study professional athletes, you want to study people in the music industry. You just go and have that point of view from within. Okay, so the researcher here is not detached, as we've heard before, for like as the empirical approach says, like you detach yourself from the subject. Actually, because this method emerges from the interpretive paradigm, you actually immerse yourself with the subject. All right, so you're getting a more insider view of the topic. And then the third value of it, or like this, like the third objective, or like purpose of ethnographic research, you want to look at the lived reality. So, so in other words, if I interview you about remote learning, I will hear some things, but those don't necessarily match how you're actually practicing or trying to, how do you say, accommodate the new reality of remote learning, right? And so having that, so although you're immersing yourself within a culturally cohesive group or culturally unique group, you want to interpret the things that you are observing, the actions, the communication, the language, the social relationship within that group. You want to interpret in a way that makes sense for the larger, to say some truth about the human beings. So those are things, in other words, when I see, when I read, when I hear something about a specific group, I can draw a conclusion about human behavior in a way that I have a point of reference. And so those type of observations would then be interpreted within a general framework or a theoretical framework, which we're going to give some examples for. So I have a question for you. So then why we do it? So I have a question, it's a very simple question. Do people always tell the truth about what they do?
Not.
Yeah, correct. So that's technically why actually we need something like ethnographic research, right? So there are many examples. people cannot tell the truth sometimes because they cannot describe it. For example, when I say something like when we things that cannot be quantified. So, for instance, I can technically quantify like learning outcomes, and we do that all the time. Like we have grades, okay, right? So grades technically are supposedly quantified measurement for the learning outcome or performance of each student. That's the basic premise. But do these grades always reflect the learning attainment of each student? Right? Can we always say, okay, that whatever you learn would be reflected in your grades? Would we always have that perfect match between grades and actual learning? So no. So there are things, so although I would argue, because that's my profession, that grades are still a valid measurement, but there are things that grade won't get. Like the curiosities, for instance, that this class or other classes have aspired you to see, or different ideas you get from interacting with your professors, or the level of, I don't know, social value you get from being in a Zoom classroom, those type of things, right? So they are not reflected in the numbers we see, but those are still like true outcomes or from the social, from this social experiment, which is being of a remote Zoom class, right? And so those things that cannot be quantified can be observed by an ethnographic researcher. That's one. And you can think about many, many things that cannot be quantified. I don't know, how do you make your eggs for breakfast in the daily morning? Or what's the nature of your relationship to your roommates? Or what's your habits of watching TV, right? There are things that can be quantified, but also these details that cannot be captured by numbers. So that's one reason we need ethnographic research. Also, ethnographic research, the good thing about it is like it can go like over a longer period of time. So if you live with someone or like you frequently observe someone for like over a span of like 3 months or 6 months, you could see progress, right? Like in terms of like mood, attitudes, regression or progression in terms of like relationship or performance, those type of situations. Whereas if we conduct an interview today, or even a focus group, I am capturing your points of view now only. I cannot see how you've arrived to them and how would you feel 3 months from now, right? So it's just one caption of one time frame. Whereas if you do ethnographic research, I stay with you for a long period of time and I see how you're dealing with like COVID risk or like with learning or with job opportunities or financial issues. Then I can also report the progress. And so also it can, ethnographic research can look into organizations. So, you know, like you get into a place and there's always like the formal part and the informal part. So there's the formal structure in, let's say, a college or university. So we have the university president, VPs, dean of each college, and then we have department chairpersons, and then we have professors and staff. That's the formal part. And then there's the informal part. It's like, how do these actors interact with each other at a personal level? Who has more like influence between like different institutions or different departments? How do people climb up the ladder? How the interactions go like vertically or horizontally? So those type of things could be observed more than expressed, because sometimes people cannot, even within an organization, cannot express them fully. And finally, some of the values of ethnographic research is that it understood something in a natural setting as opposed to experimental setting, right? So as opposed to an experiment, I won't get you into like a lab and to induce something, some game you play, and then I want to see your reactions. But I see how you act in your natural habitat, so to speak, right? Then now we're going to talk about informants. So how is like how are the data collected in ethnographic research? So the first one is like through field notes, which is like it's very simple. Like so, not easy but simple. You go into a place and then you type down your observations about like relationship, the physical setting, the number of people, the characteristics of the people you're observing, different things related to how they communicate with one another and how they describe the reality. And so the field notes would cover everything, whether it's so like material and immaterial things. And you would even type down or write down your own emotion reactions at the time. Because this is, we said, an immersive experience. So the way you felt as a researcher is also part of that experience. And so we have participant observation, it's like with field notes. And then we have ethnographic interviews, which is so similar to interview, but slightly different. So ethnographic interviews, so we would go into like a natural setting. So um, let's say schools reopen, right? And then I want to see how I want to observe the behavior of both teachers and so teachers, school children, so school kids and parents. So I go to the school, I observe, I make some notes, and then I go and ask different actors that I'm investigating. So I ask the teacher, how do you feel about this? Right? So do you feel happy? Do you feel sad? Are you excited? What you're worried about? What you're more optimistic about? What you're pessimistic about? Those type of things. So it's an interview within a natural setting. Um, and then it followed the same idea of like in-depth interviews or like focus groups. So you can have structured or semi-structured or just informal. So informal interviews would be questions you come up with just at the moment. You observe something and then you just ask or interact with the people in the ethnographic study or ethnographic environment you're studying. We already covered that part. And when we talk about interviews. However, a new component that we have in ethnographic studies is called the key informants or the gatekeepers. So I'm not sure. I'm sure you heard the term informant before, right? Do you know what an informant means? If someone is an informant, so I'm not sure if you read spy novels, but like let's see, in a spy novel, an informant would be the person who is hired by the intelligence agency who send out information. So you be stationed somewhere. So this person right here, he's from Uganda. So you'd be sent out to Uganda and then you will report information. So that's like an intelligence services. But in research, um, it's informant is someone who would extract the information from the population you study, right? So they are good into like ask a question, getting some key informations, this type of things. And those can be also gatekeepers or work with gatekeepers. So gatekeepers are key participants within your study who are from the group you're studying. That's the most important. So who are from the group you're studying, who will give you access to that group, right? Anna, I have a question for you. So you said you're either from Hawaii or lived or grew up in Hawaii. Is that right?
Yeah, I lived there for 5 years.
And where were you before that?
I was in Arizona.
Okay. So when your parents moved to Hawaii, do you know, like, do you have relatives there or you were just
No, we were
stationed there?
just there. Yeah, we just stationed there.
Yeah, okay. So anyhow, that's just out of curiosity. But assume, for example, that you're in Hawaii now, okay, and then someone shows up at the door like, "Hi, my name is Fernando, let's say, from University of Arizona, and yeah, I'm trying to I'm doing a research on people who moved to Hawaii for the last 5 years. So for the last 5 years, so can I just hang out and observe what you guys do and record your life? Uh, would you be comfortable with that? Someone out of the blue showing up at your doors and saying, "Yeah, we want to observe you."
Yeah, I guess I'd be like kind of uncomfortable, like sudden.
Yeah. So the key then, if you have a relationship with that person, so you have like an affiliation with the university, let's say, or like it's just a friend. Like, assume for instance, like when you were in high school, yeah, like you would assign that like a group project or like a school project that go to a different family than yours and try to see how similar or different. So in the way, I don't know, they prepare food or how they celebrate Thanksgiving, that's usually fine, right? Like you go and have Thanksgiving at someone else's home and they come to your home and then you observe. That's gatekeeping. Right? There's someone who will introduce that person, that researcher, to the group and say, "Hi, so this is Fernando. He's a colleague from the university, and they are doing research on blah 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 topic. They're gonna stay here for a while, and this is their research objectives. And if you have questions or concerns, I can explain it to you." So that's the gatekeeper, right? So the person who will introduce you. So ideally, yeah, you could see here, for example, yeah, you go into Uganda, let's say, for example, um, you cannot just show up at someone's village and say, "Hi, I just want to observe," and like no one would cooperate with you unless you have that sort of like a connection or the gatekeeper, right? And so that gatekeeper could be also a sponsor. So especially if there's some logistical difficulties, sometimes you actually need a permit from a specific government or a specific institution, right? So if I'm studying, speaking of like Catholic university, nuns, for instance, or like monks in a monastery, yeah, I cannot just show up. Even if I know someone in there has to be some procedures so that person could give me the right permissions for, or like grant me access to specific places or specific documents. They will try to vouch for me if someone is skeptical about my study, to try to get funding even sometimes. So these three roles could be all done by one person, or it could be done by different persons. But it's one of the unique components to ethnographic studies. So that's for the key informants, and then we have the sample. So how you going to like look at the studies? So similar to interviews, there is no like like a specific number of what number is sufficient for ethnographic studies. So if I'm just studying I don't know, like a community of online gamers, I could just pick 5 whom I'm going to observe. I can do an online ethnography and observe hundreds of members in different rooms. There's no specific number. It depends on what scope the researcher wants to explore, right? Also, the goal is not to draw generalizations. but actually to present a unique experience. So it's similar to when we said about interviews. Remember, it's not about generalizing, but it's about getting some unique or like a group perspective, which we then can compare to different perspectives. So ethnographic research is the same, right? So if I'm observing one small community in one island in Hawaii, that doesn't speak for the whole of Hawaii, but then generalization could happen if someone else replicate that study and found similar patterns, let's say in a different context, right? So different communities within Hawaii's and surrounding islands maybe, and then you could see the differences and commonalities. And from that, you could draw generalizations. But one ethnographic study doesn't give you a generalization about the whole population you're studying. It will just offer a unique human experience that we could still draw lessons from. Okay. And so how you sample, and we're going to talk about sampling when we talk about surveys, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But for ethnographic research, there's like a few ways you can do sampling. One is we call purposeful or purposive sampling. That is to say, I pick specific individuals to observe that represent some categories I have in mind. So I am select or cherry picking. So for instance, in this class, I could observe, let's say, like two juniors, two sophomores, two juniors, and two seniors, right? So I draw those informants because there are specific groups that I want to be represented, right? Or for example, let's say I compare, so I have 5 peak students who are in San Diego and 5 students who are currently outside of San Diego, okay? So it's purposive, right? So the researcher pick participants. You have snowball sampling, which is you just ask, let's say, participants you know to recruit people from you. So this is more based on convenience, right? So like I ask Jay, Anna, and Jarrett, you know, participate in this study and invite, each one of you invite 5 of your friends. So you could see them, so it's not random, it's based on convenience. So we call that snowball, like one person would recruit 2 others and those 2 would recruit 5. Hence we call it a snowball. Yes, Jared, what's your question?
Yeah, so on one of the homeworks, or like on the assignment number 3, we're looking at like focus groups, or specifically like in one of the articles, I'm like looking at focus groups for like Instagram sampling or something like that, and like the group is kind of it's kind of like the researcher lays it out in like purposive, right? Purposive, yeah, sampling. So like, do I mention that? Can that also be like a explanation for like sampling in like a focus group as well, or like interview group? Okay.
Yeah. So this is sampling for any type of things, right? So even if I'm doing a focus group, the same example I gave, like I want like, let's say 4 sophomores, 4 juniors, and 4 seniors, let's say who are male, and then 4 sophomores, 4 juniors, 4 seniors who are female, and then we run a focus group. So it's the same idea, right? And then we have volunteer sampling, which is then, this is very common. Like you just make an announcement. So, hey, Dr. Aziz is doing a study on blah, blah, blah. If you're interested, like you get $10 awarded for participating. Here's the email, and you can then show up at some place to take part in the study. So that's volunteer sampling. Yeah. So this is like more random. There's also deviant case sampling, and we call this when you collect a number, like already observe different people. So you went to, let's say, a college campus when we reopened, right? And so you went to different classes and you observed for a while, but then you noticed that one group is missing. So in other words, for example, it happens that in the classes you observed, there were almost like no Black person, let's say, for example. And so to generalize about the student experience, you would feel that you're missing some part. So you would then look for specific classes in which at least there's like 3 or 4 Black students, right? So you compensate for the shortcomings in the original sample, right? So that's the something you saw that was missing, and you want to add to see if it actually fits with that observation you've had or not. So that's in general about ethnography. So now I'm going to show you an example of one. It's based on a book called Sidewalks. And I'm just going to play like a short part of this video. So this was a full ethnographic study that was turned into like a full book. It's way back from the 90s. So let me know if the audio is. Could you hear the audio? No.
I can't.
I also
Okay.
couldn't hear it.
Okay, I'll try again.
No, I can.
Okay, good.
I used to sell jewelry, and then the police started confiscating my jewelry. As the years progressed, we saw everyone that was out here doing handmade stuff. They were slowly disappearing. It got worse and worse. They started taking our jewelry. They started taking our equipment. They started taking us to jail.
A poet had been arrested for violating our vendor law because he didn't have a license to sell his poetry pamphlets. And that struck me at the time, and I was a true civil libertarian when it came to the First Amendment. What came of that was my submitting an amendment to the local code that said, except for written materials, so that the vendor law would apply to the trinkets and beads and other things, but not to written materials.
Because they told us the only thing we could sell was written matter, we started fronting the jewelry and other things that we sold off with magazines. And then people started to buy the magazine. A lot of our old customers and friends would say, well, I got some books, I got some magazines. And we started getting them from them. And then the recycling thing came along. And we was noticing books and magazines being put out, especially in this particular area, which is NYU all around here. And that's how it started.
Okay, so it's it is actually a short documentary. I highly recommend it. It is, I don't know, it is at least interesting to me. So the person who was talking was Hakeem, the one mentioned. If you so Hakim would be what? So we have the Mitchell as the name of the author or the researcher, and Hakim is actually a street vendor. So what role is he playing in this study? I mentioned that like a few slides ago. He would be a
Volunteer?
yeah, what type of volunteer? Like a very specific role of volunteering. He's volunteering to be.
Can you
Either
repeat
small.
the question?
Sorry. Yeah,
Can
go
you
ahead.
repeat the question?
Yeah, so a few slides ago, we said like there's a specific type of volunteer who would play a role in ethnographic research. So that person, Hakim, who's introducing the researcher to the environment.
So the gatekeeper?
Yeah, right. Okay, that's exactly. So Hakim is the gatekeeper for the community of street vendor, and this was from I don't know, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with New York, but this is from Greenwich Village. And so this is really a true like a really good illustration about the value of ethnographic research because, as that gentleman was explaining, in New York City, anyone can sell written materials without the need for a permit. Okay, so you saw in that clip he's saying, and then yeah, people getting arrested if they're just selling like old like antique stuff. But then they started to switch to like selling. Once that new law happened, they then switched to selling magazines and old books and those type of things, right? And the good thing about ethnographic research is that you would never know that, right? Unless you were paying attention to what's happening around. So if you ever read the book or watch the rest of the documentary, this person, Dr. Donier, um, he just all of a sudden like you walk in the streets of New York and everyone, or like in Greenfield, everyone's selling books. So what's the deal about that? And then once you start making conversations, oh, there's that law that made it legal to sell books. And so it's not that like it won't be a research topic you could come up with unless you were in that environment, right? It's not something that you would ever guess that's the case. And I left, so aside, so you would say, okay, you could interview the people and know about that law. But I left the clip play for a while, and it showed different images, right? Like how the street vendors like are like their clothing, facial expressions, how they talk to one another, how they laugh, their relationship to the police, their relationship to the residents, their like what they do during daytime, what they do during nighttime, where do they sleep. All of that goes into ethnographic research. All right, so even if it's not about selling books in the sidewalks, everything related to or like surrounding that environment will go into ethnographic research. So you could see how this is more dense, or let's say richer in data than just conducting an interview. Okay, so this is a one good example. Here's another example. So this is from a documentary called Laundry Lives by a documentarian named Sarah Pink.
Masukkan cucian yang sudah direndam pewangi tadi. Caranya menata untuk dikeringkan begini. Oke. Nah, sekarang terus apa? Ya. Ini tali. Satu tali. Nah. Ya, jadi ini cuma tadi keringkan itu udah. Mesin cuci kan bisa untuk nyuci baju juga, untuk milas juga. Kok nggak pakai mesin cuci aja, kenapa? Saya nggak suka. Ya, gimana nanti bajunya kan cepet rusak, Mbak, yang ada gambar-gambarnya itu loh. Oh, jadi Mbak Simbok lebih tahu kalau ini seperti ini cara
Nanti
jadi
kan-
masih awet dari dulu warnanya ini.
Ada gambarnya apa kan Mbak, sablon-sablonnya kan
Sablon-sablon kan kalau di mesin cuci cepat rusak. Jadi Simboknya anu itu dulu baru biar awet. Pakaiannya
itu kan
awet.
biar cepet ya Mas. Agak lama, udah lama tapi masih
Ini
bagus warnanya.
Kan
gitu.
celana saya hitam saya ini sudah lebih dari 10 tahun. Masih bagus hitamnya.
All right, so this documentary, it's about doing the laundry, which you could think is like the most boring thing ever. But so this researcher went like this is like what your documentary is like. Would go into different environments, different countries, different communities, and would then just pay attention to those small things, right? Like how does like an old lady from like I don't know village in Indonesia or from Haiti or from Spain, how did they do the laundry? And so you start to hear this like how they deal with the machines, what they feel comfortable about the machine, what detergents they would use, how they deal with like color versus all white versus like black or dark clothings, those type of things. And then you would look into like different things like sanitations, running water into different communities, their relationship, like sometimes neighbors built around doing the laundry, that type of thing. So it took a small part, actually doing the laundry, you could argue it's a big part of someone's life, but then it draws something like a larger, try to have a larger framework about it. What did that say about the cultures that we're investigating, right? And so you could see the benefits for this, right? Let's say you're from I think the brand, the product, the washing machine was from LG. So you could imagine if you're an executive, marketing executive from LG, you want to see this type of research, right? Because it would show you how the customers are dealing with the product in real life. Not what they tell you they feel, not what your surveys tell you, but you see actually how people are interacting. This is another one, and yeah, still have 5 minutes. So this is an interview.
An increasingly popular technique in new product development is what has come to be known as ethnography, a term that really grew out of the field of anthropology, and it's really just an academic sounding word for observational research. Why do it? Well, I think the notion is that sometimes there's a huge departure between what people say they do versus what they actually do. And the only way we would know this, of course, is through observation. Another problem is that there's some needs that we refer to as unarticulated needs. They're things the customer doesn't even think about, and in a straight conversational interview might never bring up. I'll give a couple of examples of that. We were many years ago working with a division of Baxter on a new dialysis machine. And one of the things that no customer ever brought up, but which we observed, is that during a dialysis treatment, the nurses have to be writing a lot of things down. And they seem to be going ridiculous distances across the clinic just to find a flat surface on which to write something down. Nobody ever brought it up, but we observed it time and time again. And what my client ultimately did was they put a flat shelf on top of the machine that was just incredibly popular, even though it had been totally unarticulated. Now, of course, once you brought it up with people, yeah, they recognized it immediately. Yeah, I always go all the way over to the nurse's station just to write something down. There's also, again, this disconnect between what they do and what they say they do. If you we were doing something on auto painting, and companies, it turns out the process of color matching is actually non-trivial. It's a very complicated thing to do, and all of the paint manufacturers have a very rigorous specific way, set of steps that you're supposed to go through to get a perfect match. Well, when we got out there and started watching guys painting cars, what we saw was they weren't paying any attention to all those steps at all. They were taking every shortcut in the book, figuring they could get it close enough. Why do they do that? Well, most of them are paid based on piecework. So, faster is better, and close enough is good enough. And our client was totally unaware of this. So this big disconnect that you can only learn sometimes through observational techniques. Now, there are a lot of pros and a lot of cons to ethnography. One of the difficulties is that the interviews are very costly and very time-consuming. And as a result, it's impossible to get the kind of sample size that many product developers feel they need to do good voice of the customer or good discovery study. So they tend to rely on relatively small sample sizes.
So yeah, so you get an idea of like how useful this could be. So for marketing, for product development, for like customer service, ethnographic research is, as a matter of fact, professionally of great value, because there are things, for example, like you were struggling with the product. So I'm not sure, like I'm sure some of you work out or like on weightlifting or something, and maybe if a professional observes you, they would tell you actually you're doing that exercise wrong. You're doing it the wrong way. Or like, for example, like dealing with a machine or a computer or like a washing machine, and there are things like there are some features that you're not aware of or you're not using the right way. Okay, those that you cannot, as the gentleman mentioned, you cannot bring up. You never thought about it, right? But if someone knows and then they're observing you, that could come up, right? So it's something, as again, you cannot get from asking people what they experience, because sometimes they don't know. And also what the gentleman said, sometimes they cannot tell you like the full, like the disconnect between what people say and what people do, right? So we unfortunately ran out of time. So we only have like 3 slots left. So we're going to continue on Friday before we move on and talk about quantitative research, which we're going to cover from like next week and then up until the end of the semester. Do you have any questions?
What time on Friday is the individual assignment number 3 due?
Midnight.
Okay, thank you.
You have until the last minute of the day, or the night. So. Okay, so see you later then.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.